I've been hard of hearing since I turned 63. Nothing dramatic, just the slow dimming of the world, like someone turned the volume down a notch every year. At first, it was a nuisance, then a joke, then apparently an open invitation. My name is Dorothy Hale, and I'm 68 years old. I used to be a librarian for nearly 40 years. Words were always my friends, and silence was my companion. Maybe that's why losing my hearing stung more than I let on. It started gradually, in my early 60s. The ringing, the straining to catch conversations in noisy rooms, and then the withdrawal. I stopped going to book clubs, skipped family dinners more often. No one really noticed, not even my own daughter. My hearing aid became my lifeline. It helped me catch pieces of a world that had started to fade, but it also became something of a joke in my family, especially among the younger ones. My daughter's husband, Greg, he's the kind of man who thinks sarcasm is intelligence, and their kids, my grandsons, Sam and Jacob, well, they followed his lead. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, Greg lifted my hearing aid while I was dozing on the couch and whispered, "Testing, 1, 2, 3, old bat online." They all laughed. I pretended to sleep, but I heard it, every word. Later that night, I told my daughter Claire that the boys had crossed a line. She sighed. "Mom, they're just playing. Don't be so sensitive." Sensitive? That's what they call it now when you ask to be treated with respect. So I stopped mentioning it. Until the day they didn't just joke about it, they took it. It was Claire's birthday. She was turning 42. She insisted on a fancy brunch at a modern fusion restaurant that blasted music so loud the silverware practically vibrated off the table. I could barely hear a thing, even with the aid in. I was already feeling out of place, trying to follow conversation by watching lips and reading faces. Then it happened. Sam, the older grandson, he's 17, snuck behind me and plucked the hearing aid right out of my ear. "Grandma, you don't need this," he said, waving it like a party favor. "We'll just shout." Everyone laughed, even Claire. I froze. My hands trembled under the table. The ringing in my ear was immediate, sharp and shrill. My balance shifted slightly and I had to steady myself. "Give it back," I said, trying to stay calm, but to them it just added to the joke. Greg took it from Sam and put it in his wine glass like a prize. "Cheers to Grandma's earpiece," he laughed. "Let's toast to finally being able to say anything we want without her hearing." They clinked glasses. I felt humiliated, exposed, like I didn't even belong to the family I'd built. I stood up quietly, ignoring the glances from nearby tables, reached over, took the wine glass and fished it out, wiped it on my napkin with more dignity than I felt. Claire rolled her eyes. "Oh, Mom, relax. It was just a little joke." I looked at her for a long moment, and that's when something shifted in me. You know that feeling when the last straw finally lands? It wasn't rage. It wasn't sadness. It was awareness. I realized then I had spent the last decade slowly disappearing, bit by bit, and they were helping me vanish without a second thought. So I sat back down. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply listened. Without the aid in, the voices were muffled, but I didn't need to hear to understand the tone. I watched their faces, their smirks, their self-satisfied laughter. I memorized every detail, and in that moment I made a decision. This would be the last time they ever laughed at me. The last time they ever underestimated the woman who raised Claire, helped them buy their home, and paid for their son's private school when Greg was unemployed. They'd forgotten who I was, but I hadn't. They'd taken my hearing aid as a joke, so I listened one last time. And then I changed everything. After that brunch, I didn't return to their house for weeks, not for Sunday dinners, not for the boys' birthdays. I didn't even text Claire back when she sent one of her short, "Hope you're okay" messages, the kind that sounded more like obligation than concern. And you know what? No one came looking. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone, and strangely, it felt peaceful. I cleaned out my garage, donated clothes I hadn't worn since Reagan was president. I took long walks without telling anyone where I was going. I even stopped wearing my hearing aid for a few days, not out of protest, but because I needed to hear myself again. The silence had a truth to it, a space that helped me think. And in that silence, I made a plan. But that little side project, it had doubled in value, and more importantly, it had tenants, good ones. A single mother named Jasmine and her 8-year-old son, Malik. They paid on time, kept the place spotless, and sent me Christmas cards every year with hand-drawn snowflakes. I liked them. I trusted them. So when Jasmine called me in early spring to say her rent was getting hard to manage after her hours were cut at work, I saw an opportunity, not just for kindness, but for change. "Jasmine," I said gently, "what would you say if I told you I'd been thinking about selling the house, but not to just anyone, to you?" There was a long pause. "But I can't afford a down payment," she said, almost apologetically. "I'm not asking for one," I replied. "I'll sell it to you at half its value. We'll set up a payment plan. No banks, no interest, just your word, and a future for Malik." She cried. I cried too. It wasn't charity. It was a transfer of dignity, of value, of legacy, and most importantly, it was the first piece of my exit plan. Because here's the thing, I had always been the safety net, the fixer, the quiet backbone behind the scenes. When Claire's college fund ran low, I covered the difference. When Greg totaled their car and insurance didn't pay enough, I co-signed for a loan. When the boys needed laptops for school during the pandemic, I bought them both brand new MacBooks and said Santa brought them early. But none of that mattered. Not when I became an inconvenience, not when they laughed as if I weren't even in the room. So I stopped being the net. I closed the joint account Claire had access to. Quietly, legally. That account had over $42,000 in it, money I'd saved from my pension and Social Security. Then I pulled the boys off my phone plan. They'd never paid me for it anyway. I canceled the family Netflix subscription, the one under my name. Claire texted, "Netflix logged me out? Did you change something?" I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because the silence was finally mine. But the biggest move was yet to come. You see, what Claire didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the house they lived in, the one they always bragged about on Facebook, look at our beautiful home, grateful for family, blessed beyond measure. That house was mine. I bought it 5 years ago when Claire and Greg's credit tanked. I didn't want them on the street, so I bought it under my name and let them live in it, rent-free. They never asked how it was paid for. They just assumed. And assumptions, my dear, are expensive. So I went to the county clerk's office and filed the paperwork, a formal notice of sale, a transfer, to a buyer I trusted, someone who would respect the home and the woman who once filled it with love. I'll never forget the way the clerk looked at me when I slid the document across the counter. "You sure about this, ma'am?" I looked him straight in the eye. "They took my hearing aid like I was a joke," I said, "but I heard every word. Now it's my turn to speak." 3 weeks passed. 3 quiet, deliberate weeks where every move I made was precise. My lawyer, an old friend from the library board, helped draft the formal eviction notice. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. The house was mine. I no longer wished to support people who treated me like background noise. It was a sunny Tuesday when the envelope went out. Certified mail. Tracked. Signed for. Claire got it on a Thursday. She didn't call. She didn't email. Instead, she showed up. I was sitting in my sunroom pruning my African violets when I saw her silver SUV screech into my driveway. She got out fast, too fast, and slammed the door hard enough to make the wind chimes rattle. She didn't even knock. "Mom," she snapped, storming through the kitchen. "What the hell is this?" I didn't look up from my plants. "Good morning, Claire." "Don't play games with me. This says you're evicting us, that you're selling the house." I finally turned to her. She looked wild, her hair thrown into a messy bun, no makeup, panic behind her eyes. "I am," I said calmly, "in 30 days. Her mouth opened, then shut. "But it's our home." "No," I said softly, "it's mine. And it has been the entire time. You can't do this, not to your own daughter. We've lived there for 5 years. The boys—" I raised a hand. "The boys who mocked me? Who ripped a medical device out of my ear for laughs? The husband who put it in a wine glass like I was some novelty?" Her cheeks flushed. "It was a joke, Mom." "No, Claire, it was a message, and I heard it loud and clear." She took a step back like I'd slapped her. "But we thought you were fine. You always laugh things off. You never speak up." "I do now." For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but it wasn't guilt in her eyes. It was fear. Fear of losing comfort. Fear of consequence. She sat down at the edge of the couch. "Greg just got a new job. We can't afford to move. The boys are still in school. How could you do this to your family?" That word, family. "You don't get to weaponize that word when it suits you," I said. "Family doesn't treat each other like burdens. They don't humiliate the people who help them survive." I paused, letting the air settle. "I didn't do this to punish you. I did it to free myself." She was quiet then. Really quiet. She stood up slowly like her bones had aged 10 years in that moment. "So that's it? 30 days and we're out?" "Yes." "And the money you've given us over the years, was that just leverage?" I shook my head. "It was love, but love isn't a lifetime coupon." She left without saying goodbye. That night, I made myself tea and sat in the same sunroom where she'd once brought me tulips on Mother's Day. I remembered her as a little girl, scraped knees and pigtails, and a soft voice that once whispered, "I'll always take care of you, Mama." But that girl was long gone, and I had finally stopped waiting for her to return. The call started 3 days later. First from Greg, who, to no one's surprise, went straight to voicemail, then from Claire's friends. Women I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly flooding me with shallow greetings and questions masked as concern. "Hey, Dorothy, just checking in. I heard something strange from Claire. Surely you're not really kicking them out, right?" They weren't concerned. They were fishing, picking sides, and I let them. Because I had no interest in defending myself to people who only remembered I existed when I became a topic of gossip. Then the real parade began, Claire's attempts at guilt by grandchild. I received a card in the mail, handmade, drawn in colored pencil, from Jacob, the younger one. "Please don't sell our house, Grandma. I promise to be nice. I miss you." It nearly broke me. Nearly. But then I remembered how Jacob had stood next to his brother and laughed while they passed around my hearing aid like a party trick. I remembered how I'd asked for kindness, and they'd handed me mockery instead. I would not be swayed by a drawing that came only when consequences arrived. That week, I saw them posting on Facebook vague quotes about betrayal and how some people just change when they get old and bitter. Pictures of the boys sitting solemnly on the porch of the house I owned, captioned, "Trying to make the most of the time we have left in this home." I didn't comment. I didn't message. Instead, I smiled to myself, because for the first time in years, I was no longer background noise in my own story. I was the one turning the page. Greg came by the next week. Not Claire, just him. He didn't knock either. Instead, he paced around my backyard like he owned it. I was watering my hydrangeas when I finally stepped out and said, "Something I can help you with?" He flinched. He hadn't realized I was home. "Look," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I get it." We crossed a line. "But isn't this a little excessive?" "Excessive," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean holding you accountable for years of disregard? I mean, come on, Claire's upset. The boys don't understand. We thought you were okay with the teasing." "I was never okay," I replied. "You didn't notice because you never cared to ask." He opened his mouth again, but I didn't let him finish. "I've already sold the property," I said. "You have 18 days. His face went blank. "Wait, you sold it? Already?" "Yes." "To who?" "To someone who won't put a disabled woman's medical device in a wine glass and laugh." That shut him up. He left without another word, and I went back to my hydrangeas. Later that evening, Claire texted me for the first time in a while. It was just 2 words. You've changed. I stared at those words. I thought about how many times I'd changed over the years, to accommodate, to forgive, to endure. And then I wrote back, no. I finally stopped pretending. No response. Just silence, which ironically I could finally hear for what it was, peace. With each passing day, I expected them to lash out harder, threaten legal action, show up with some last-minute plea for sympathy. But instead, nothing. Not even a knock on the door. Claire had always been the type to pout in silence, expecting me to fold first. But this time, I didn't bend. I didn't call. I didn't soften. Instead, I planned my next chapter. I started packing up small things, photos, keepsakes, old recipes tucked in binders with frayed edges. Not because I was moving, but because I realized I no longer needed to display a life no one respected. I wanted space. Not just in my house, but in my heart. I donated my husband's old suits to a veterans charity, shredded old bills, burned journals that held too much pain and not enough hope. It wasn't revenge, it was release. I was rebirthing my space. One afternoon, I got a call from Jasmine, the woman I'd sold the other property to. I just wanted to say thank you again, she said softly. Malik sleeps better now. He keeps saying this feels like a forever place. I hope we make you proud. You already have, I told her. You've reminded me that respect has nothing to do with blood and everything to do with heart. I hung up with tears in my eyes, the kind of tears that come not from pain, but from freedom. That same week, I hosted tea for a few friends from my old book club. I hadn't seen them in years. They showed up with shortbread cookies and worn-out novels under their arms, all assuming I was still the same quiet Dorothy. But when they asked how I'd been, I told them the truth. I told them everything. The hearing aid, the brunch, the eviction, the sale. I watched their faces shift from shock to awe. And then one of them, Lillian, sweet but sharp, reached across the table and said, "About damn time, Dorothy. You've always been too kind. Kindness is good, but it shouldn't be your cage." That line stuck with me for days. Kindness shouldn't be your cage. I'd spent most of my life believing love meant sacrifice, that the quieter I was, the more I'd be appreciated. But that's not how it works, not anymore. Not when your silence is used as permission, not when they laugh at your disabilities, not when they only remember you when they need something. 18 days after the notice went out, the moving truck finally pulled into the driveway of the house I once let them call home. I watched from across the street in my car. I didn't tell them I'd be there. I didn't need to. It wasn't about drama or confrontation. It was about closure. Claire came out first. Her hair was pulled back tight, her eyes red and tired. Greg followed, cursing under his breath as he hauled boxes. The boys were arguing over who forgot the HDMI cable, and not once did they look back at the house. They didn't take one last photo on the porch, didn't thank the home that sheltered them for 5 years, didn't whisper a goodbye to the life they'd lived so comfortably, because they never saw it as a gift. They thought they were entitled to it, and entitlement has no gratitude. The new owners arrived the next morning, a couple in their 50s with a little dog that barked at everything and nothing. They waved at me when I walked by. The woman offered me a slice of coffee cake the following Sunday. It wasn't just a new chapter, it was a whole new story. And this time, I was writing every word of it myself. No more background roles, no more whispered jokes at my expense, no more pretending I couldn't hear what was always loud and clear. It was 2 weeks after they moved out when I finally got the second card. This one was from Sam, the older grandson. It arrived with no return address, just a plain white envelope in my mailbox, written in that messy, half-grown handwriting only a teenager has. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No "Dear Grandma," no closing, just 5 words scrawled in dark blue ink. I didn't know it hurt. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at it, not crying, just listening. Because even without my hearing aid in, I could hear the weight in those words, but I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because some lessons require silence. He needed to sit with that feeling of recognizing pain not when it's pointed out, but when it finally echoes in your own chest. In the meantime, I was building something better. Not a revenge plan, not a legacy lecture. A life. I started volunteering again at the local literacy center. Twice a week I read to children who needed extra support. Many of them spoke English as a second language. Some of them couldn't read at all. One little girl, Ava, clung to every word I said. She told me I had a grandma voice that feels like soup. That one line made more impact than years of false "I love yous" from the people who shared my blood. Jasmine invited me over for dinner one Friday. I brought a pie. Malik hugged me before I even got to the table. They had framed one of my old housewarming cards and put it by their entryway. "Feels like you're always here, even when you're not," Jasmine said, smiling. That night, I sat with them, laughing, eating, listening, not straining to hear words between the noise of disrespect, just simple, kind conversation, and I realized this was family. Not forged by DNA or obligation, but by presence, by care, by shared respect. I donated my second hearing aid, the old one, to a local senior center. Told them someone else could make use of it. I bought myself a newer model, one with better clarity and comfort. And every time I put it in, I felt no shame, because it was never the hearing aid that made me less than. It was the people who treated it like a toy. One afternoon, I got a knock on the door. It was Claire. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in spirit, like she'd been carrying her own weight now and finally realized how heavy it was. "I'm not here to ask for the house," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say sorry." I didn't invite her in. I stood at the doorway, hands in my sweater pockets. She looked down at the porch, then back up. "I didn't see you, Mom. I mean, I saw you, but I treated you like you were just there, like you'd always be there, and I let the boys follow Greg's lead. That was my failure." I nodded, not offering a smile. "Not yet." She continued, voice cracking. "I miss you. We miss you. Not the money, not the house. You." That word, you, finally meant something. "I'm not the same anymore," I told her. "I can't go back to being invisible just to keep the peace." She nodded. "I wouldn't ask you to." There was a pause. "I brought this," she said, holding out a small box. Inside was my old hearing aid, polished, cleaned, and sitting atop a note. "I'm sorry we made you feel like less. You're more than we ever deserved. I see that now." I looked at her for a long time, and then I said, "I'll come visit for dinner, but not as your lifeline, just as your mother. That's enough." She smiled, her eyes wet, and this time I heard it all. The dinner invitation came the following Sunday. Nothing flashy, just baked chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans from a can. Claire didn't try to impress me. She just cooked, like she used to when we both still believed life was simple. I showed up in my favorite floral blouse, hearing aid in, hair pinned neatly back, walking tall. Greg greeted me at the door. His smile was unsure, almost apologetic. He didn't reach for a hug, just said, "Dorothy, thanks for coming." I nodded. "I'm here for Claire, not for your redemption." He didn't argue, just stepped aside. Inside, the boys looked different, not physically, but in how they watched me. Sam actually stood when I entered the room. Jacob handed me a paper crown he made, scribbled with crayon, "Queen of Quiet Power." I didn't wear it, but I kept it in my purse. Dinner was awkward at first, stiff. No one dared joke. Every word was filtered, measured, cautious. And then something surprising happened. Jacob looked at me across the table and asked, "Grandma, how do you become brave?" The room froze. Claire's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I leaned in. You decide that your dignity matters more than being liked." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. After dessert, Claire walked me to the door. The night air was still, and for once the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like clarity. "I don't expect things to go back," she said, "but I hope they can move forward." "They can," I replied, slowly, honestly. "But only if you remember this isn't about forgiveness. It's about change." She nodded, eyes wide with understanding. As I drove home that night, I didn't cry. I didn't replay conversations or pick apart words. I just listened. To the sound of the road, the hum of my new hearing aid, the quiet confidence of knowing that I'd rebuilt myself brick by brick, without apology. For too long, they treated my silence like an absence. But silence isn't emptiness. It's a choice. And now, when I walk into a room, they don't whisper. They listen, because I taught them how. Not with shouting, not with threats, but with stillness that held weight, and decisions that held power. So, yes, they took my hearing aid as a joke, but I used that silence like armor. I listened one last time, and then I rewrote everything.